Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Ira Jain Khandelpal and I'm a pathology faculty for Marrow. Today I'm here to discuss the AIMS 2020 pathology questions with all of you, right? So first of all, I would like to tell you the analysis of the paper, students. This year the AIMS exam was not a normal exam, what we anticipated. Many of the questions and most of the questions were from the familiar topics, but from pathology there were 4 to 5 questions which were of the level of MD pathology. And but please students, don't change your preparation strategy because of these questions, because these questions are tough. They are tough for everyone and they will be there once in a while, correct? Let's see each of the questions one by one. So the first question is, type 4 hypersensitivity is due to. I am starting with the easiest of the questions so that your morale is always boosted, right? So the options were innate immune response, antibody and cell-mediated and allergic reaction. All of you know the answer is very direct. It is cell-mediated. Type 4 hypersensitivity is a cell-mediated hypersensitivity reaction, also called as a delayed type hypersensitivity, correct? Now, every year in AIMS or the NEET exam, this hypersensitivity is frequently asked, and what is asked from this hypersensitivity reactions is the examples of each type of hypersensitivity. So let us quickly revise the examples of these hypersensitivity. Type 1, also called as anaphylactic or allergic hypersensitivity. What are the examples? Bronchial asthma, any kind of allergic reaction, food allergy, pollen allergy, allergic rhinitis, correct? They're all type 1 hypersensitivity reactions. Hay fever, PK reaction, Cassoni's test, right? All of these are examples of type 1 hypersensitivity, correct? Also, for type 1, you have to remember that the cytokine which is very important for type 1 hypersensitivity is IL-4 and IL-5. Which cell is most important? The answer is mast cell or eosinophil. Next question which is asked is, what is the earliest mediator to be released in type 1 hypersensitivity? Answer is histamine, correct? Then we have type 2 hypersensitivity, which is antibody mediated, right? There is antibody, right? For that, I always tell a mnemonic, which is excellent mnemonic to remember the examples, because this is a very frequently asked question in all the exam students. What are the which of the following is not a type 2 hypersensitivity reaction? So the mnemonic is, my blood group is Rh positive. M for myasthenia gravis, B for blood transfusion reaction, G for Graves' disease, Goodpasture syndrome, I for ITP and immune hemolytic anemia, R for rheumatic fever, H for hyperacute graft rejection, and P for pernicious anemia and pemphigus vulgaris, right? An excellent mnemonic. Then we have type 3 hypersensitivity, which is immune complex mediated. So there is an antigen and antibody. They combine with each other to form immune complexes. For that, there is a mnemonic which is called as SHARP. S for serum sickness, SLE. H for hypersensitivity pneumonitis. A for Arthur's reaction, R for reactive arthritis, and P for post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis and polyarthritis nodosa, correct? Remember, latest thing, hypersensitivity pneumonitis is both type 3 and type 4, correct? Next point, in AIMS exam 2 years back, there was a question, direct question, serum sickness is what kind of hypersensitivity? The answer was type 3, right? Last is type 4 hypersensitivity, which is also called cell-mediated or delayed type. What are the examples? Tuberculin reaction, lepromin reaction, multiple sclerosis, acute and chronic graft rejection. So hyperacute graft rejection is type 2 because it is antibody mediated, whereas acute and chronic graft rejection are usually type 4. Contact dermatitis, type 4. Remember, atopic or allergic dermatitis, type 1. Contact dermatitis, type 4. Rheumatoid arthritis, type 4. In many MCQ books, it is wrongly given that rheumatoid arthritis is type 2. No, it is type 4. Type 1 diabetes mellitus and inflammatory bowel diseases, correct? So this is about hypersensitivity reactions, which is a very frequently asked topic in AIMS or NEET exams. Next question is, students, Hayflick limit is the total number of times a cell can divide in their lifetime, the total number of times a cell can divide in a year, total number of times a cell can divide in a month, or a total number of times a cell can divide in a day. Now, if you remember, when I was teaching you the topic of cellular aging, I told you this new concept of Hayflick limit. What is Hayflick limit, students? First of all, let's see the answer. It is the total number of times a cell can divide in their lifetime, in their entire lifetime, right? Normally, they say that a cell usually divides around 60 to 70 times in their lifetime. Now, you will ask me a question, why will a cell divide only 60 to 70 times and not indefinitely? Because of the process of telomere shortening. Remember, when we study about cellular aging, I told you the concept of telomeres and telomere shortening, that with every cell division, telomeres shorten. What are telomeres? They are short repeated sequences of DNA at the ends of chromosomes, right? So when the cell divides, the telomere shortens. Ultimately, when the telomere totally disappears, the cell dies, right? So this Hayflick limit is also associated in the process of cellular aging, and it is why is it happening? It is due to telomere shortening, right? So it is the total number of times a cell divides in their entire lifetime, correct? So this was also a new question but taught in the videos, correct? Next question. A female underwent knee replacement surgery, and after some time she showed loosening of the knee joint, right? After some time she showed loosening of the knee joint, and the important point here is knee replacement surgery. The histopathology is given. What is the most likely diagnosis? Now, this may not have told to you in the class, but it's a very, very students' common sense question. Why is it a common sense question? Because see, if the female has undergone a knee replacement surgery, then the female would not have developed ochronosis, right? Ochronosis is a metabolic disorder, right? It occurs in alkaptonuria. So if a patient has alkaptonuria, the patient will not, in the question, you won't be given a history of a knee replacement surgery, correct? Here the important thing is knee replacement surgery. Then melanoma. There is no history which is suggestive of melanoma in this question. And Rosai-Dorfman is totally a different category of a disorder which usually affects the lymph nodes. So that is also not here. So the best answer here is metallosis. That's the best answer here. That is metallosis. What is metallosis? Even if you don't see the picture, because there is a history of knee replacement surgery, that means you are putting some prosthetic implant in the patient, right? Some prosthetic or a foreign body. This prosthetic implant might be carrying some metal. Those metals leak in the blood, get deposited in the tissues, and that condition is called as metallosis, right? When I see this picture, we all can appreciate these cells which are seen. This is a foreign body giant cell. This is a foreign body giant cell, correct? Because this metal or the implant is a foreign body, it leads to the production of this foreign body giant cell. And here what we are seeing is this pinkish area. This is basically what? This is basically fibrosis, correct? So the logical answer in this question is metallosis, right? Next question, students. A needle biopsy of prostate shows acinar adenocarcinoma. So the patient has got prostatic adenocarcinoma. Predominantly cribriform pattern is seen, followed by crowded but separate glands and a minor component of single cell infiltration. Okay. So remember, students, when I teach prostate cancer, I always tell you about a very important score which is called as a Gleason score, right? It is a score which is given by a histopathologist, right? Why do we give this score? Because when a pathologist sees a prostatic biopsy, I can see glands or cells arranged in different manners, right? So the predominant pattern, what is Gleason score? I see two kinds of patterns. The predominant pattern which I see on the slide is called as the primary grade, right? And the second most frequent pattern is called as a secondary grade. And what is Gleason score? We add both the scores, the primary and the secondary, and we have the Gleason score, right? For example, I'll show you this image, students. It is a Gleason's pattern scale, right? Now, what this scale says that what is grade 1? What is grade 1? Grade 1 is when a pathologist sees small uniform glands, right? What is grade 2? When I see more stroma between glands. What is grade 3? When I see there is an infiltration of cells at the margins. What is grade 4? When there are irregular masses of neoplastic cells with very few glands. And what is grade 5? There is a lack of occasional glands, or there are sheets of cells, right? So from 1 to 5, we move from well differentiated to poorly differentiated, correct? So when a pathologist sees small uniform glands, I will say it is grade 1, right? So I will see which is the more prominent pattern, correct? So suppose there is infiltration of cells from glands at margins. That is what we see. So I will say it is 3. The second most frequent source, suppose I see irregular masses of neoplastic cells with very few glands, I will say 3 plus 4 is the grade. That means the Gleason score for that patient is 7. That is called as a Gleason's pattern scale. I will repeat all these points again. 2 grades are given to the 2 patterns which are present on the slide. One is the primary grade, that is the dominant pattern, and we have the secondary grade, which is the next type of pattern, correct? Gleason score is equal to the primary grade plus the secondary grade, right? If you see, suppose you will ask me, if I see a single pattern on the slide, you will double the numbers, right? Suppose I just see 3, I will double the number. That means Gleason score is 6. And if there are 2 patients, one who has a score of 3 plus 4, another patient who has a score of 4 plus 3, the question which the examiner can ask next time is, which of these patients has a better prognosis? Obviously, students, 3 plus 4 has a better prognosis. Why? Because the primary component in this case is of a lesser score, correct? So 3 plus 4 has a better prognosis as compared to 4 plus 3, right? Now, one latest thing which has come up in 2016 in this Gleason scoring is this grading, that is Gleason's 3 plus 3. So they say the first 2 grades are not found in the biopsy. That is why we start with 6, right? Gleason 6. When you see only individual discrete well-formed glands, that is grade 1. 3 plus 4. What is 3 plus 4? You see well-formed glands with a lesser component of cribriform glands, right? We call it 3 plus 4 and it is grade 2. 4 plus 3 is another new entity which has been added. That is, you see more component of poorly formed glands with lesser component of well-formed glands. That is grade 3. Grade 4 plus 4 is poorly formed cribriform glands or well-formed glands with a lesser component of well-formed glands. Or Gleason's 9 or 10 is lack of gland formation, poorly formed fused or cribriform glands, or single cell infiltration. So according to the latest thing, students, single cell infiltration is regarded as grade 5. That is why the clear answer in this question is grade 5. It was a tough one, a little MD pathology one, but then it has been discussed many times, right? Let's go to the next question, students. The component of apoptosome with cytochrome C and APAF1 is procaspase 8, procaspase 9, procaspase 4 and procaspase 5, right? Now students, remember, apoptosis, I always tell you, is one of the favorite topics for either the AIIMS examiner or NEET examiner. All the examiners, apoptosis is a favorite topic, right? This was a very direct and easy question. All of you know that when cytochrome C combines with APAF1 and leads to the formation of apoptosome, it leads to the activation of procaspase 9. That is why the answer is procaspase 9. What is procaspase 9? That is an initiator caspase. This will lead to the activation of executioner caspases like caspase 3 and 6, and that will lead to apoptosis, right? Just a brush up. When apoptosis occur in the intrinsic pathway, procaspase 9 is a part of intrinsic pathway of apoptosis, whereas procaspase 8 is a part of extrinsic pathway of apoptosis, correct? So when this happens, there is the leakage, there is an activation of Bax-Pak channel, there is a leakage of cytochrome C. This cytochrome C combines with apoptosis activating factor 1 or APAF1, lead to the formation of apoptosome, which leads to the activation of initiator caspases like caspase 9, which leads to executioner caspases like caspase 3 or 6, and that leads to apoptosis, right? Please remember, students, never leave any point from this topic of apoptosis. Very, very important. Let's move to the next question. False about a hemopoietic stem cell is, right? Also very, very common sense question. Which of the following is false, right? For a stem cell, they can differentiate. All of us know that stem cells can differentiate into various lineages. That's the property. They can replicate. Obviously, they are provided with a very good capacity of replicating again and again. Then they can regenerate damaged tissues. Yes, stem cells help in tissue regeneration and repair also. They can divide without any regulatory stimulus. So which answer are we left with? Which option? That is option D. They can divide without any regulatory stimulus. No, they cannot divide without any regulatory stimulus. If a cell divides without any regulatory stimulus, that cell will lead to the production of a malignancy, right? So this cell also cannot divide without any regulatory stimulus. It divides with the help of some regulatory stimulus, right? Few things about stem cell, students, you should know that there are four kinds: totipotent, pluripotent, multipotent, and nullipotent, right? A totipotent stem cell is capable of replicating or producing everything, all the cell types and extraembryonic tissue. Pluripotent will give rise to all cell types of the body but not the extraembryonic tissue. Multipotent, only one particular lineage ke cells. Nullipotent will not divide. Right? So these are the types of stem cells which we have. What are the various properties of stem cells? There is a property of self-renewal, right? Obviously, they can renew again and again. Replication, yes. Differentiation, yes. They differentiate into various lineages. And asymmetric division. What is asymmetric division? That when a stem cell divides, the daughter cells which are produced, one daughter cell will retain its self-renewal capacity while the other daughter cell will go into a particular lineage. That is asymmetric division, which is a very important property of a stem cell, right? Now, another important concept which you have to remember here, from which questions can be asked, is the pluripotency of any stem cell is regulated by 4 transcription factors. That can also be asked in the exams, right? What are those 4 transcription factors? OCT34, SOX2, CMYC, and KFL4, right? So a pluripotency is dependent upon 4 factors. That means this is also a cell which requires some regulatory stimulus, correct? Next question. Which is not a part of pap smear? Orangey, eosin B, light green SF, hematoxylin. Now this is one question, students, from cytology, which was a tough one, right? This question was a tough one. Very few students must have marked it correctly. The components of pap smear, right? The answer I will tell you, the direct answer in this question is eosin B, because eosin B is not a part of pap smear. Eosin Y is a part of pap smear, right? So here I will tell you what are the components of a pap smear, students. There are 5 main components which are there in a pap smear. 1, hematoxylin. All of you know hematoxylin does nuclear staining, right? Then we have orangey. This orangey stains the keratin, right? Then we have eosin azure. Now this eosin azure is a combination of 3 things: eosin Y, light green SF, and Bismarck brown Y, right? Eosin Y, light green SF, and Bismarck brown Y. So the answer in this question is eosin B. Why? Because eosin B is not a component, eosin Y is a component. Another future question which can be there is the best fixative for a pap smear is 95% ethanol, right? So remember these components of a pap stain which were asked this year because they can be asked in the future AIIMS exam, correct? Let's move to the next question. A 24-year-old male comes to the emergency 6 hours after a road traffic accident with a BP of 90 by 60 millimeter mercury and a pulse of 110 per minute. He was given blood transfusion. He developed tachypnea, febrile, oliguric, and has a history of long bone fracture. There is bleeding into the NG tube and IV cannula sites. What is the most likely cause for this presentation? Fat embolism, hemorrhagic shock, acute adrenal insufficiency, and transfusion reaction. First of all, I will tell you the answer in this question is transfusion reaction. What are the keys in this question? Why do I mark it as transfusion reaction? Very easy. One, there is a history of blood transfusion in this question. The symptoms are developing 6 hours after the road traffic accident, right? And most important clue in this question is bleeding into the nasogastric tube and the IV cannula site. If this is given, that means the patient has developed a blood transfusion reaction. That is why this is the answer. You could also attempt this question by rejection. How come? This is not fat embolism. Some students messaged me that, ma'am, we have marked fat embolism. Why is it not fat embolism? Why? Because one, in the question stem C, it is given that it is developing 6 hours after road traffic accident. Remember when I had taught you fat embolism, I had taught you that it develops 2 to 3 days after a long bone fracture, right? Not after 6 hours. That's why it's not a fat embolism. Secondly, in a case of fat embolism, there is also a history of petechiae, which is there usually, right, which is not given in this question, right? So, and the history of bleeding from the nasogastric tube and IV cannula site obviously is indicative of transfusion reaction, correct? Next question. Which of the following is true about celiac disease? It can cause GI lymphoma. CT scan is required for diagnosis. It improves with complex carbohydrates like bread and pasta. Most common cause of malabsorption in developing countries. You have to mark the correct statement, right? I have always told you students that celiac disease is one of the examiner's favorite topic, whether it is AIIMS or NEET exam, right? Now, which options do you think are correct, right? It can cause GI lymphoma. Remember, students, I told you that celiac disease is a risk factor for enteropathy associated T cell lymphoma, right? So, which kind of lymphoma can develop in celiac disease? It is enteropathy associated T cell lymphomas. So, this option is correct till now. Let us see the other options. CT scan is required for diagnosis. No, you don't require a CT scan. How can we diagnose this patient? Either on the biopsy or also by serologic parameters like anti-gliadin antibodies, anti-endomysial antibodies, or anti-tissue transglutaminase antibodies. Correct? It improves with complex carbohydrates like bread and pasta. Remember, I told you that for celiac disease, the patient should not take brow. What is brow? Barley, rye, oats, and wheat. So the patient will not improve if the patient gets complex carbohydrates like bread and pasta. So that is also wrong. Most common cause of malabsorption in developing countries, no. The incidence of celiac disease is increasing in developing country students, but still the most common cause of malabsorption in developing countries is tropical sprue, not celiac disease, right? So the answer in this question which we will mark is can cause GI lymphoma, right? Few quick words about celiac disease, also called as gluten sensitive enteropathy. The patient cannot have brow, I have already told you. In NEET PG, this question was asked that it is associated with which HLA types? Answer is HLA-DQ2 and DQ8. Very important thing, which is a future exam question, students, the histopathology of celiac disease. We see three things. One, crypt hyperplasia, villous atrophy, and increased number of intraepithelial lymphocytes. Three important criteria, right? And when a pathologist measures these criteria, we do a score which is called as a Marsh score, which is done for celiac disease, correct? Last, it is associated with dermatitis herpetiformis and increased risk of enteropathy associated T-cell lymphoma. That was asked in the question. This is a histopathological slide which shows you villous atrophy of a patient of celiac disease. We can see this is the normal biopsy, students. I can see these villi. On the right hand side, you can see there is villous atrophy or there is a flattening of villi which can be seen, and the crypts are hyperplastic. Increased intraepithelial lymphocytes is usually seen on high power, correct? Next question, very easy again, students. Next concept based question covered in the class. The graph below shows the normal rate of synthesis of various hemoglobin chains in utero. This is in gestation, and on the right side we see after birth. Gamma chain of hemoglobin is indicated by which of the following? Okay, so one thing which is incorrectly mentioned here is I have mentioned in this already these chains are labeled, right? Alpha, delta, beta and epsilon, right? So they were not mentioned in your AIIMS paper. You had to tell the gamma chain of hemoglobin is indicated by. All of you can see the answer is B. B is the gamma chain. How come I come to this question? See, so all of you know, all of us are adults. We have HbA, which is 95 to 97%, and that is alpha to beta 2. Two alpha chains to beta chains. We also have a minor component of HbF, which is approximately 1%, and that is alpha to gamma 2. We also have a component of HbA2, which is 2 to 3.5%, which is alpha to delta 2, right? These are the hemoglobins in a normal adult. Now, you see that this chain, which is A, this is totally constant. So this will be your alpha chain, right? So in gestation or in utero, which chains will be there? Fetal hemoglobin will be there more, right? So you can see fetal hemoglobin is high, and when the child is born, this fetal hemoglobin diminishes, right? This gamma chain is present in fetal hemoglobin, so it should diminishes. That is why this is gamma chain, right? So A2, we have delta chain. So here you have delta chain which is there, which is formed after birth only, a minor component. And lastly, epsilon chain is the embryonic hemoglobin which is present, and this is only present during gestation, not seen after birth, right? So this is a very easy concept based question which was asked. Let's move to the next question. Which of the following is not a cross-linking fixator? Now, another question, students, which was tricky. I always tell the students that fixation is one of the favorite topic of the examiner, right? But this time the examiner asked you another level question, that they asked you the kinds of fixators which are there, right? First of all, I'll tell you the answer. The answer here, which of the following is not a cross-linking fixator? Answer is ethanol, students, right? Why? Because when I tell you about the types of chemical fixators, there are of three kinds, students: coagulant, cross-linking and compound. You know what is a fixative? Fixation is a process by which what we do. In this process, we have to preserve the histopathological specimen or a tissue, right? Why? So that it can be easily seen for histopathological examination, right? Now, the various kinds of chemical fixators which we have are coagulant, cross-linking and compound. Coagulant fixators work how? By the release of water and the coagulation of proteins in the tissue, right? Which fixators are coagulant fixators? Ethanol, methanol, acetone, right? Remember, the alcohol fixatives are coagulant fixatives. That is why the answer in this question is ethanol, because it is not a cross-linking fixative, it is a coagulant fixative, correct? What is a cross-linking fixative? It works by the formation of bonds between the various tissues, right? So aldehyde fixatives like formaldehyde, glutaraldehyde, even osmium tetroxide, they are cross-linking fixatives. And compound fixatives are a mixture, right? So this was another level question, which was a tough question which was asked this time. Which is not a cross-linking fixative? Answer is ethanol. The important questions from fixators which are usually asked students are, what is the fixative which is used for cytological examination? Remember, it is 95% ethanol which is used for cytological examination. First question, right? Second, the most common fixative used in histopathology is 10% neutral buffered formalin, correct? PGI Chandigarh people asked a question 3 years back, what is the most common fixative used for electron microscopy? And in that, students, the answer is glutaraldehyde or osmium tetroxide, right? They are used for electron microscopy, glutaraldehyde and osmium tetroxide, right? Another high-level question which I always tell is, for testicular biopsies, we do not use 10% neutral buffered formalin as fixative. What we use is Bowen's fluid, which contains picric acid, right? Bowen's fluid, a yellow colored fluid which contains a coagulant fixative called as picric acid. Correct? Important questions from fixators. I hope it is clear. Let's move to the next question which was asked. A very easy and direct question which was asked is, Eto cells are present in which part of the liver? Sinusoid, space of Desaix, periportal location and biliary canaliculi. Answer, all of you know, it is the space of Desaix, right? So when I tell you, students, a diagram of a liver, you see these are the hepatocytes. And this is a vessel, right? This is a sinusoid. You know, in between the hepatocytes and the sinusoid, the endothelial cells, we have this space, and this space is called as the space of Desaix. In the space of Desaix, we see these stellate cells, and these stellate cells are also called as the cells of Eto cells, right? And these Eto cells, what is the function of these Eto cells? They store vitamin A. Plus, a very important function is, when a patient has cirrhosis, right, it leads to the formation of type 1 and type 3 collagen, and therefore it leads to fibrosis, right? So which cells are responsible for fibrosis and cirrhosis? Answer is the Eto cells. Another potential question for next year can be, Kupffer cells are located where? So remember, Kupffer cells are located in the perisinusoidal space, right? In between these sinusoids, Kupffer cells are located, which are the mononuclear phagocytic system of the liver, right? Let's move to the next question, students. The next question is, the drug of choice in hairy cell leukemia is, the options were pentostatin, cladribine, pentostatin and interferon alpha. I've told you a number of times, students, that hairy cell leukemia is one of the examiner's favorite topic, right? The answer to this question was straightforward, that is cladribine, which I told you in the videos, right? Right, so few important points about hairy cell leukemia. It's a B cell disorder. The patient will usually present with massive splenomegaly, right? What do you see? You usually see pancytopenia due to bone marrow fibrosis, correct? When I see the bone marrow aspirate and the patient has myelofibrosis, what will you see? You will see a dry tap, right? When I do a bone marrow biopsy in such a case, students, that is the investigation of choice, you will see a fried egg appearance, correct? Another fried egg in pathology, oligodendroglioma. The stain which is used for hairy cell leukemia is tartrate resistant acid phosphatase, or the cells are TRAP positive. What are the markers? The markers are annexin A1, DBA, CD25, CD11C, CD103, right? Annexin 5 on the other hand is a marker for apoptosis. And the drug of choice in this condition is cladribine, right? These are the important points. Next question. It was a very direct question, students. ESR is increased in pregnancy due to elevation of fibrinogen, platelets, increased albumin, antithrombin antibody. The answer is very direct. ESR in pregnancy is increased due to the elevation of fibrinogen. It increases. Correct? Next question. A little tough question, students, again from cytology, which was asked. True regarding liquid-based cytology is: urine specimen is used, Sanger sequencing is used, study of fluid and tumor microenvironment, and DNA is collected in microvessels, right? Let us see all the options one by one. First option is urine specimen is used. Yes, urine specimen can be used, right? Let's see the other option. Sanger sequencing is used. Sanger sequencing as it is a very, very uncommon procedure, right? Because you cannot have a very good DNA, that is why you don't do Sanger sequencing. Study of fluid and tumor microenvironment. No, these terms, tumor microenvironment, you don't study the fluid and tumor microenvironment, you study the fluid for the detection of tumor, right? And DNA is collected in microvessels. No. So the best answer in this case is urine specimen is used, right? Although it is not a very preferred specimen, but urine specimen can be used. You all know that what is liquid-based cytology, right? Liquid-based cytology is basically used for the detection of pap smears. So in pap smears, either we can do conventional pap smear or we can do liquid-based cytology. What do you mean by liquid-based cytology? Why is it called liquid-based cytology? Because the sample which is collected, it is deposited in a small bottle which is containing some preservative liquid, right? It is a very, very new modality, students. And why is it good? It is better as compared to a conventional pap smear. Why? Because the number of cells which are discarded or wasted, they are less. That is why there is increased sensitivity of detection, correct? That is why it is very, very important that liquid-based cytology is preferred over the conventional cytology for pap smears, right? This was a question on the tougher side. Next question, again a very tough question, a MD pathology level question which should not have been asked. Adequate specimen in case of FNAC of thyroid will be having, right? So adequacy of a FNAC thyroid will be having 6 to 8 follicular cells containing 10 to 12 cells, 10 follicular cells containing 6 to 8 cells, 3 follicular cell groups with each 10 to 15 cells, and 6 follicular groups with each 10 to 15 cells. Correct answer here was 6 follicular groups with each 10 to 15 cells. That's the adequacy of FNAC of thyroid. A very tough question. What are the criteria for adequacy of thyroid FNAC? What are the criteria? 6 group of follicular cells with at least 10 cells each, right? But there is an exception to this criteria. What are the 3 exceptions to this criteria? 1, thyroiditis if the patient has, or there is a colloid nodule, or there is atypia or malignancy, right? So in the next AIIMS exam, this can be asked, which of the following is not an exception for the adequacy for the criteria for FNAC of thyroid, right? So thyroiditis, benign colloid nodule, and anaplasia or atypia, correct? Next, which of the following is not a alpha-synucleinopathy, right? What is a alpha-synucleinopathy? It is the deposition of alpha-synuclein in the neurons or the glial cells, right? All of you know that it is basically happens in neurodegenerative disorder. If I see the options in this question, one is Parkinson's disease. You all know that in Parkinson's, we have the deposition of alpha-synuclein and the presence of Lewy bodies. So it is an alpha-synucleinopathy. Multiple system atrophy is another alpha-synucleinopathy. Lewy body dementia, again alpha-synuclein. Alzheimer's disease should be the answer. Why Alzheimer's should be the answer? Because in Alzheimer's, we see the presence of neuritic plaques, neurofibrillary tangles. They don't contain alpha-synuclein. They contain tau protein, correct? Plus, we see Hirano bodies, which are not composed of alpha synuclein, they are composed of alpha actin, right? So the answer here is Alzheimer's disease. Next question. Which of the following is not a complication of massive transfusion? This was a direct question, students. All of you know, okay, hypocalcemia, hypercalcemia, hypokalemia and hyperkalemia, right? You all know the mnemonic for complications of massive blood transfusion, which I told you, that is CATCH. C for coagulopathies, A for metabolic acidosis and alkalosis, both can occur. T for thermia, so hypothermia. C for citrate toxicity, and H for hyperkalemia or hypocalcemia, right? So these are the complications of massive blood transfusion which are there. The question which was asked is, which of the following is not a complication? You can see hypocalcemia. Why will you see hypocalcemia? You can see hypocalcemia. Why? Because there is citrate toxicity. This citrate will chelate the calcium and lead to hypocalcemia. So that occurs. Hypercalcemia does not occur. So this should be the answer. It is not a complication. Hypokalemia. Hypokalemia can occur. Why? Because of metabolic alkalosis, right? Hyperkalemia can occur. Why? Because of RBC overload. What will happen? There will be a release of potassium and it will lead to hyperkalemia, right? So the answer in this case is hypercalcemia, correct? So these are the complications. Another very frequent question which is asked from massive blood transfusion is, which is the most common cause of death after massive blood transfusion? Answer is coagulopathies, which can lead to DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation, right? The next question, colon adenocarcinoma, correct gene sequence is APC, BRCA, KRAS. Now this option C, do you think BRCA is involved in colon adenocarcinoma? No, so that's wrong. DCC, P53, MYH and chromosome 6? No. MYH and chromosome 1, P53, APC? No. APC, KRAS, P53, DCC? Yes, that's the answer. APC, KRAS, P53, DCC? Yes, that's the answer. So the correct answer here is APC, KRAS, P53 and DCC. Remember students, I always tell you a very important thing, that is adenoma carcinoma sequence is one of the favorite topic for the examiner. Few years back in AIIMS exam, this diagram was given and on KRAS there was nothing. Okay, this place was blank. So they asked you what is there? Answer was KRAS, right? This year they have asked you that what is the correct sequence. For this I always tell you the mnemonic. Students, that is AK53. That's the mnemonic which I always tell. A for APC beta catenin, K for KRAS and 53 for P53, right? So first hit is APC, second hit is KRAS, and the third hit is P53. Let us see the options. Let us see the diagram. Normal colon, the first hit, tumor suppressor gene, APC at 5q, right? Then methylation abnormalities, and the second hit is APC beta catenin. The development of adenoma will occur because of proto-oncogene. RAS is an oncogene, right? So KRAS will come next, and after that the development of carcinoma will occur when there is expression of P53. So we have AK53, APC, KRAS and P53, correct? That is the adenoma carcinoma sequence which is frequently asked in the exams. Next question, correct about given Vacutainer is. I've always told you that Vacutainer is one of the favorite topics for the examiner. Now, EDTA, remember I told you EDTA Vacutainer will have a lavender color cap. So that's not the answer here, the cap is red. Sodium fluoride, no, sodium fluoride Vacutainer will have a grey colored cap. That's not the answer. Heparin, remember I told you heparin and hurry, that means green cap. So that's not the answer. Clot activator, yes. The answer here is clot activator, because red color tube is used for serum studies, and what it contains is it contains a clot activator, right? Let us see the various kinds of vacutainer. Remember, why are they called vacutainers? Because they have a vacuum inside. When you put the needle inside, the vacuum will suck all the blood, correct? That is why they are called as vacutainer. Now, the color coding in case of vacutainers is very important. Why? Because the cap which is there is differently colored, and the color of the cap indicates what kind of fluid or the substance or the anticoagulant that particular vacutainer is carrying, right? So, the light blue vacutainer contains citrate, right? And this is used for coagulation studies and ESR determination by Westergreen's method. The black vacutainer again is used for ESR determination, contains citrate. Red is serum studies, contains a clot activator. Gold again SST vial. Green is Hara for heparin. Lavender EDTA, the most commonly used for CBC, PS, etc. Pink cross matching and blood group, it is used in blood bank. Grey cap contains sodium fluoride and it is used for blood sugar estimation, whereas a royal blue is used for trace elements, right? So this diagram is extremely important, students, and very, very frequently asked. And by asking vacutainers, the examiner wants to test your knowledge about how much you've worked in a laboratory, right? So these were the important pathology questions which were asked in AIIMS exam 2020 in June, students, right? 4 or 5 questions were a little tough. Otherwise, the paper was very standard and the topics were repeated. For those 4 and 5 questions, I am repeating again, do not change your preparation strategy, because if those questions are tough, they are tough for everyone, not just for you. The questions were from cytology and usually of the level of MD pathology. So even if you have done a lot of in-depth studies, you would not have been able to solve those questions, right? So don't waste your time on such questions, correct? So these were the important things. There were 3 questions on COVID also, which were as expected asked in AIIMS exam, and I'm leaving those questions. They were mostly from microbiology, correct? Now, many students keep asking me about the kind of preparation strategy which they should apply for pathology in the future exams, right? What you have to do, students, I keep on repeating, keep listening to the videos and making your own notes. That's the ideal scenario. If you cannot make your own notes, then you can take the printed notes and keep adding on stuff, right? Very, very important to solve the Q bank and mark those questions which are wrong or incorrect, so that when you revise, you also see those questions, right? Whatever extra points you see in the explanations of the Q bank, add it to your notes so that when you revise, you just have a single copy, right? Now, for newer updates and volatile topics, I always tell the students to make a separate copy for all the subjects, or in a single copy, you can write down the newer updates and volatile topics or tables for all the subjects, right? Don't read from multiple sources. That's the most important thing. Many students come to me and they will be like, ma'am, I have done pathology from 5 different places, but now I don't know anything. I don't retain anything. Obviously, what I say is always trust one source. Do a particular subject from that source and keep on solving the MCQs and adding the extra points to that particular source, right? That's the ideal for all these subjects. And the last important point which I would like to tell you is revise. Without revision, you cannot crack the entrance exam, right? So revision is the most important thing. Keep on reading stuff and revising stuff. Don't read new things just a few days before the exams. Another thing which I get a lot of messages from students is, what about Robbins? Students, now you don't have time to read Robbins. So don't change your preparation strategy or don't start reading Robbins now, right? If you have to appear for the exam in a few months, Don't read Robbins now. You have to read the notes, revise the notes, solve the Q bank, right? That's the ideal preparation strategy. And give approximately 7 to 10 days to pathology, not more than that. Keep revising the notes, right? Also, important point is many students message me about the images. For images students, I always say it's tough to remember the images because in second year we do not see the images in very depth, right? So what I tell the students is maybe when you are doing pathology, you just have to flip through the pages of Robbins or the important images which I have done in with you people in the videos. Just flip through those images and see the labeling. Try to understand what has been told to you, correct? Lastly, students, I would like to end this entire discussion with a very, very important quote, which I always believe in. Start by doing what's necessary. If you start today by doing what's necessary for you, what's important for you, then do what's possible. After that, you do what is possible, and suddenly you will realize that you are doing the impossible, right? So important thing is to start doing now. Don't delay the things for tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Start doing the important and necessary things from now so that you can do what is possible, and then you can reach the impossible goal, right? So thank you so much and all the best for your patient listening.